What's going on, everybody? This is another episode of Bourbon Talk, and I am here with Sagamore Spirit this week with Brian. How are you doing this evening, Brian?
Great, Ty. Thanks for having me.
Good, man. Yeah. And so, yeah, we kind of talked a little bit about the show. So, like I said, this is a podcast and a video format, and each week we just kind of discover different whiskeys and take people along the ride. And we kind of talked beforehand, man. There's people all over the place, whether they're just kind of getting into whiskey or whatever it may be. And to give you a background of the show, I actually started this because one of my favorite things. I mean, I enjoy whiskey, but I just love having people over and hey, try this, try that. Oh, I've never heard of that before, or whatever it may be. And so for me, it was just like with the pandemic and everything that happened, I kind of missed that part of it. Hanging around a lot of people. So I kind of had the idea of why not do this every week and get a chance to maybe meet people and talk with people and enjoy some whiskey with some that I may not have otherwise met. So so that's the basis of the show. Like I said, welcome, and hopefully you're having a good week so far.
Yeah, no, I was, I guess it's Tuesday. Someone told me just a little bit ago. It's been good. It's just a whirlwind for sure. It's in our industry, it's the busiest time of year as you're
Yeah.
gearing up for the holiday season. You'll do 35% of your volume, maybe even more. In the last 90 days of the year. So it's a great time of year to be in the business. Great time of year to be in the industry. And I love the reason you started the show too. It's one of those whiskey's kind of this fluid of conversation and I think back in the day it was one of those where you said it was kind of like done in a dark room. Sometimes people were alone if they're drinking whiskey, and it's we always say share our spirit. Like it's kind of one of these things where it's like no, it's meant to be shared with friends and people maybe you don't even know yet. But and that's one of the coolest things I think about whiskey is it's this like fluid of conversation that just brings so many people together. It's awesome.
Yeah. That's man, that's so yeah, well said. And actually, I got this question not too long ago, and so I'm interested in your take only because of you just brought it up. But you talked about that last 90 days. What is it about that last 90 days that causes it to be that boom of the year? Is it just the
You know,
holidays coming up? And
yeah, it is. One, it used to be kind of like this, which we always joke about. Like there used to be a seasonality to whiskey. Well, now we all know we all drink whiskey 12 months a year. So that's the
right,
cool.
right.
Like there's no seasonality to it, but I think it picks up a little bit with maybe some folks that aren't, hardcore enthusiasts, which is great. It's also just a time of year of gift giving. It's a great time of year to be given a gift. And a lot of times it's one of these things, you have some interesting releases that come out in the fall. And if you can find one of those and somebody who likes whiskey, it's a great gift to give. They'll really appreciate it, especially if it's something hard to get. So, um, and then there's just a lot more celebration. I'm hoping this year, in a safe manner, there's going to be even more celebration, with group friends and family actually getting together. So you just, the holiday parties, the gift giving, all those types of things just tends to be a good year for the booze business, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because with I have a few bottles behind me, but I have a bar in my basement, and it's like my name and the nickname is Ty the Bourbon Guy. So it's like family and friends of mine during the holidays. They're like, oh, I got to find them this bottle, and it's like I would take. There's a lot of ones out there that it's like it's still good whiskey and plenty of things out there on the shelf that are and plenty of companies that are doing amazing things. So um, yeah, it's one of those things where I think people think you have to get something, whether it's a high price item or something like that. And there are definitely some special bottles out there, but it's like, man, no, there's plenty out there that's sitting there that I'll take gladly. So
Yeah, you just it's something about this time of year. You hate to go over to someone's house that's inviting you over for dinner empty-handed, right? And so
right.
you know, now you said you have a bar in your basement, Ty. You also got a
Mhm.
bar behind you. How many bars you got?
Yeah, right. Well, so I actually have I have a 1 year old. So I think my bar space is gonna, it started. I do have some in the basement. A lot of it's in the basement, but I got some here because this has a door with a lock on it. So, so, um, but yeah, I feel like my space is probably kind of condensing down a little bit. So, Uh, I started out, we had some bottles out, in our dining room, or that type of thing, and that kind of goes away over time with the little one. So um, now he's got a playroom and all these other things, and I'm trying to condense down. So
You'll be just left to a closet at some point here, my friend.
right,
Like that's
yeah,
good.
I
Like
know, man.
everything, clothing, whiskey, all has to fit into here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's like you said when you made a comment earlier about how it's Tuesday, and it's yeah. Uh, my son's in daycare and they had a fall break. My wife's a teacher and they had fall break, and they were off for a week, and so getting him back into a routine. So I think he knew. I guess what was it, Sunday night? It's like he knew that, and last night for the most part. It's like, oh, Dad, Mom and Dad are going back to work, so I'm going to stay up all night long, and
Oh.
yeah. So for me, I'm like, man, it is only Tuesday. So, um, but yeah, before we get too into it, we'll back up a little bit here and kind of just tell everybody about yourself and about Sagamore Spirit, and um, anything that maybe they should know, or where you guys are located and that sort of thing.
Sure, so Sagamore Spirit, we're our distillery. We're based out of Baltimore, Maryland, right in downtown. So if you've ever been to Maryland or familiar with Baltimore, we're not far from the Inner Harbor, which everyone always talks about, or Fort McHenry, and or Camden Yards and M&T Bank. So it's one of the greatest cities in the world. So if you haven't been there, come see us. We'd love to have you. There's a lot of great things to do here. A lot of great museums. A lot of great distilleries. There's over 40 distilleries now in Maryland, and we've got a lot of great restaurants and bars, and it's like a really cool place. I love the city that we're in, and we're very proud of that. So we're very lucky to be where we are and have the community behind us that we have. And what really kind of inspired us really is the fact that Maryland has a rich history of distilling that goes back 158 years before Kentucky was even a state. So a lot of folks don't necessarily know that, we have this incredible history of distilling. Now, of course, it was predominantly rum at that time. But eventually, in a lot of ways, not too different than some of the problems and the headwinds we deal with today, eventually we got hit with a bunch of taxes and tariffs on the molasses coming in from the British West Indies. And of course, Baltimore is located on the Inner Harbor, which is basically an extension of the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. And right in the Inner Harbor was the second largest site for immigration next to Ellis Island. So we had a tremendous amount of people from Poland, Germany, Scotland, Ireland, those types of places that knew how to distill grain-based type products. So we grew a lot of tobacco, and we used a lot of rye grain for cover crops. So when we started getting hit with those taxes and tariffs, the folks in the area, they didn't want to pay taxes and tariffs. They just wanted a good dram. So they just switched over to grain-based type products, and by the early 1700s, we were really predominantly rye whiskey. And as time goes on, things escalate a little bit with the British, and we have a little something called the Revolutionary War. We come out of that, $54 million in debt, and the government decides a good way to pay down that debt, is going to be raising the federal excise tax on the distilleries. And of course, we didn't like that idea either. So you start having, those rumblings of the whiskey rebellion, in the mid-Atlantic region, especially in Pennsylvania, where people didn't want to pay those taxes. And that was in the early 1780s. And then by about and that's when families started leaving Maryland and moving to places that weren't developed yet. And a lot of folks don't know that it's Mary and Jacob Beam from the Beam family, Basil Hayden. Those types of families were distilling in Maryland before leaving for places that weren't quite developed, or really just an extension of Virginia. And then in 1792, it would eventually be called Kentucky. So luckily, obviously the whiskey rebellion ends peacefully. Distilling flourishes in this country. Kentucky, Maryland, Pennsylvania, some of the leading producers of whiskey in the country. By 1910, we had 44 distilleries in Maryland that were licensed, all making rye whiskey, 21 in downtown Baltimore. We kept making it through Prohibition. It's one of the reasons Maryland's called the Free State. And then again, unfortunately, things when we came out of Prohibition, we were exporting to Europe and Scotland and so forth, during those times. And Maryland really earned this reputation of being a superior rye whiskey. And Maryland style rye really got to be this brand, this identity of a unique tasting rye whiskey. But by about 1933, we had the Agricultural Act, where the government started subsidizing corn, paying farmers to stop growing rye, gearing up for ethanol production for World War II. And then, a lot of the distilleries switched over to help support the war efforts. And unfortunately, the distilleries in Maryland didn't really make much of a comeback. And the last distillery closed its doors in the early 80s, like 1982. And then they sold that name off to Heaven Hill, and that's Pikesville Rye. So if you ever read the back label of Pikesville Rye, it talks about Maryland style. And so, long-winded way of just saying, we thought it was fascinating that there was actually this history, this brand, this identity of Maryland style rye. And no one actually in Maryland for decades doing it, but yet that identity lived on for a long time. And because other distilleries wanted to do it. And so we just saw it as a great opportunity. So, we have a farm that's about 22 miles north of downtown Baltimore. We grow a lot of our grain on it. It's built on a shelf of limestone aquifers. We use the limestone water from there for proof in our whiskey. So that's where we get our name, Sagamore Spirit, from Sagamore Farm. And we have a great history of distilling in Maryland. And so a lot of people say, why do you only do rye? It's because we want to focus in on one thing and be excellent at one thing and help bring back that Maryland style rye that our state used to be famous for. So long-winded way, I'll pause there for a minute, Ty. I kind of went on, once you ask me a question like that, man, I can go. But so that's just kind of like, who's Sagamore, our relation to a farm, why rye, what's Maryland style rye, how do we get in the game, why did we get in the game? And that's kind of just a little bit of the lowdown.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I think even just hearing the history stuff, I think it's one of those things that I do feel like has been taken for granted. One of the things, so I'm also really into barbecue. And one of the things I love about barbecue is probably the same thing I love about whiskey, is that it takes time. What you start with absolutely matters in the end. And, so all that stuff, the process. And I think sometimes when we just grab a bottle, you're not really thinking through the work that it took to make that bottle. The history of not only whiskey, but the country at the time, what we were going through. You talk about the different taxes, all that stuff. I think sometimes that history can kind of get lost. So yeah, anytime I can hear more about it, I love that for sure. So I appreciate you sharing that. I'm actually from Virginia originally. So
Oh, yeah?
yeah.
Whereabouts?
So I grew up in Prince William County, right outside of
Okay.
DC, on the
Yeah.
northern Virginia side. Right. So, and so, yeah, Baltimore, I've been there several times, and obviously Maryland as a whole, been there so many times. But and then I moved to Indiana, so every time I go back home, the first thing I do is I get crabs. That's like my my family just knows they have to have crabs ready for me when I get there.
That's right. It's a given.
So Baltimore, great city. I know we actually have some people in the chat that are actually live in Baltimore. So that's, I know they're excited for for this episode. They're very familiar with Sagamore Spirit. So I think it's interesting too. You hit on, hey, we just really want to do Maryland rye right, and focus on this. And I do think, regardless of who I talk to, it just kind of seems, from my perspective, of like almost like the the whiskey consumer is never really happy. It's like if you have a distillery that focuses on bourbon, it's like, hey, why don't you make a rye? And then vice versa. Why don't you make a bourbon? And why don't you finish bourbon? It's like, I think we always want more and more. But one of the things that I'm excited about with this, when people say the bourbon boom, but it's just how many, distilleries and how creative distilleries have gotten with whiskey. Excuse me. And I just think it's really cool of a thing to, I hear some people say, oh, back in the day, I could go in and just grab this off the shelf. And I understand that, but I just love how it's pushing that creative envelope to see some brands come around, some different products come around, and more competition is a good thing. So,
Yeah.
but
No,
yeah, so I'm pretty familiar with with the Maryland area. So
that's great, man.
yeah,
All right. Now we're in.
yeah,
Let's go.
yeah.
Um,
DMV.
no,
Yeah,
but
from there.
I think it's interesting. I won't get these exact figures right, but sometime around the year 2000, I think we had maybe 54 distilleries in this country, and then today we have almost 2,500 distilleries in this country. And, you know, it really kind of flourished around 13, 14, 15. And so, yes, we all love some of those big classic names that put out a lot of amazing whiskey that's, you know, 18 years old or whatever and hard to get. But there is this, what's exciting to me is there is a wave of very small, young suppliers that are now 4, 5, 6, 7 years in. And if they're making whiskey, that we're inching closer and closer to having, you know, 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-old whiskey. And then you just another 5 years from now, you think about that, and there should be a tremendous amount of amazing whiskey on the market for the consumer, which I think super exciting, and probably more than we could ever fit on our back bar. But it's going to be really fun, and you know, nobody necessarily wants to do exactly what the other person's doing, because that's kind of boring and, like I said, not very creative. So each one's going to have its own unique spin on their products, which is kind of what I think is the appeal and the lure to this, and makes it so fun. And you know, and not every product's going to be for everybody. I know. I always say, you know, we make 3, 4 products. I just hope you like one of them. You know, I don't expect you to love them all. They're quite a bit different, you know. But if you like one of them, I think we've had a good day with you, you know,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so, but yeah, you know, there's a lot of good whiskey out there now, and I just think, gosh, buckle up. Another 3 to 5 years, there's going to be a lot more good whiskey out there.
Yeah, there's a few people that I talk to, and they, you know, they kind of say, you know, if I recommend a certain brand, you know, and they're like, oh, I tried it a couple of years ago, it wasn't for me, and I'm like, but I understand that, but with, like you said, if you tried something 2 years ago, maybe that's a 2-year old whiskey, and maybe now it's 4, or maybe now it's 6, and you know, in a few years from now, if maybe you don't like what's here now, and you know, now you're dealing with a 10-year old, you know, so it's like I think people kind of miss that part of it sometimes, where even if there's something maybe at the time you didn't care for, and our, you know, our taste changed too, and whatever, and so it's like, you know, I'm a big fan of like, hey, I'll go back to that and see if one of the things, it's funny when I actually, with rye whiskey, you know, because I kind of got started on bourbon, and I've been probably about 2012, and then I think 2014, 15 is when I would say it became like a passion type thing for me. Um, but I was never really big into rye, and I actually did an event here in Indy, and there was several different vendors there, and different distillers and companies, one of which was Sagamore, and the person and I wish I could remember their name, but the person I spoke with, excuse me, they, you know, I said, well, I'm not the biggest rye person, and they said, but have you tried our rye? And I said, no, you know, I haven't tried it, and I tried it, and I tried every single one of them, and I was like, man, this is, you know, and it was a little different from what I was used to. Um, and I think for me personally, it helped me because some ryes are so close to bourbon, in my opinion, that it's like if I'm going in this direction, then I, you know, again, being a bourbon guy, it was like I'll just grab a bourbon. But in a good way, the ryes that I had from Sagamore, it was kind of taking me down a rye route, a true rye, you know, and it was just a different experience than I had with other ones. Um, so that's kind of what got me. And there's a few other ryes that I had along the road that I was, you know, kind of like, okay, you know, but there's actually a guy that's on Instagram, and he does like all rye, you know, loves rye whiskey, and he'll send me messages every now and then. It's like, try this, try that, try this, and he's a huge Sagamore fan. So he was another big reason as to why I was like, okay, yeah, I can get into this. And so now, you know, as my palate expanded, you know, ryes are great, and I got into some scotches, things like that too. Um, so yeah, I'm a big fan of, like, you know, you may not like it at that point in time, but keep trying different things, and you may not know. I actually had a relative that owned a, excuse me, owned a liquor store, and he was the one that got me into scotch, because
Hmm.
he's like, well, you like bourbon, try scotch. And I'm like, I don't, you know, I don't like the smokiness. I don't like, you know, at that point. And he's like, you like scotch, you just haven't found a scotch that you like. And I was like, that's fair. And he helped
Well
me
said.
find,
Well said.
ones that I liked, and the same happened with rye. And then, you know, as I kind of get used to them, um, and understanding this is not bourbon, I'm going a different direction, then it kind of, you know, I was able to expand my palate there. But So no, like I said, man, earlier when we were just talking, I'm really excited to have you on the show, and we have a few different whiskeys here to actually try. So the first one I have here is the rye 83 proof. So I'll pour it in the glass here and let you kind of share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, and just to backtrack a little bit too, you bring up so many good points back there. One, I bet you met Brett. He's one of the hardest working guys in the business, and he's great. He often represents us in Indiana. But two, we just don't have the ability to wait for a product, to get 5, 8 years old before we finally release anything. We just kind of got to get going and got to get ourselves on the shelves and start get a business going. And, so if you tried our whiskey when we first released, and we were extremely proud of it, otherwise we wouldn't have released it. But it was basically a 3.5-year-old whiskey. And that's the product you have in your hand was a 3.5-year-old whiskey. Now the product you have in your hand today is a blend of 4 to 6-year-old whiskey. And so it's slowly evolved, in a very positive way too. We know that age and too much age is a bad thing. We think we're in a pretty sweet spot right now with this 4 to 6-year-old blend here. And so what we really strive for this is something that we do that's a bit unique is we distill 2 mash bills, right? And to be a rye whiskey, just like a bourbon, to be a rye whiskey, like a bourbon, you have to be 51% corn. To be a rye, we have to be 51% rye in our mash bill, and then we can do whatever we want after that. We distill one that's 95% rye, 5% malted barley, and we age that 4 to 7 years, depending on the product. And then we distill one, we call it barely legal rye. Like I said, you have to be at least 51% rye. So this is 52% rye, 43% corn, 5% malted barley. And we age that 4 to 7 years, depending on the product. And then every product you're going to try tonight has both of those mash bills in it. So every product we have has a blend of those 2 straight ryes. And the reason we do that is we like the spicy complexity that you get from the rye grain that you associate with rye whiskey. Those baking spices, the clove, the nutmeg, the mints, the cinnamon, that type of thing that we might associate with it. But with that barely legal rye and that corn, we do like what Maryland was known for is a bit sweeter, a bit rounder, more approachable rye whiskey than 100% rye mash bill or something. And those can be beautiful, but that's just not what Maryland was known for. And so we like to get the best of both those worlds. We get the rye spice, but we also get this interesting fruity floralness that can come in on the back end and some sweet notes and can be very unique and different. So like you said, it's kind of not your typical rye. It's what we call Maryland style rye. This signature rye, which is 83 proof, we are looking for is something that's full of flavor, but very easy to drink. So folks newer to rye whiskey, looking for a lower ABV, still stands up in a cocktail, old fashioned, Manhattan, whatever you may want. Maryland ryes were historically known 80 or 86 proof, kind of split it right down the middle with 83 proof, and came away with something that we think is kind of a nod to our understanding of what historically pre-prohibition Maryland style ryes were.
Yeah, and it's just on the nose. I mean, it's like for me, it's definitely. I mean, just smelling, I could tell that it's a rye, but it's like I'm trying to think of the right word. It's almost like it doesn't seem too heavy. Like sometimes things can overpower. This almost seems like it's like a brighter rye.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that lower ABV, when you get to 41.5% ABV, if you're used to 100, 110, whatever, as soon as you start doing kind of an organoleptic evaluation and nosing these things, you're going to at first always pick up on kind of just a lot of alcohol, especially if you don't, breathe through if you kind of keep that mouth open, but if you keep your mouth closed and breathe through your nose, you're just going to burn out your nose. But keeping your mouth open, breathing through your nose very gently, you pick up some nice rye notes, whether it's a little bit of clove. I get a little bit, actually, some aromatics, like some also citrus on it a little bit. But like, I'm not getting any like, ooh, that's a big, bold whiskey. Like you said, it's a kind of almost, there's definitely some interesting notes on the nose, but it's not like heavy. It's light.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. There's excuse me, there's plenty of whiskeys on the show that I kind of share with viewers, and again, there's a lot of people watching that are kind of new to whiskey or trying to understand different things, and one of the things I say is just approachable. And again, being in the bourbon world, there's plenty of times where people ask me, oh, try this one, it's 136 proof, and it's like it's like, well, one, it's 100 degrees outside, so no, I'm not doing that. But I think, in my opinion, I think people kind of forget at one point maybe you enjoyed something in the 80s, maybe, and then you kind of figured out higher proof as you went along, but there was something about it when you started with it. So don't kind of, it was because it's approachable and it's something that you can, at least for me, it was starting with something that was 80 proof kind of allowed me to learn how to drink it neat. And I may not have picked out all the different notes, but at least, I'm learning how to drink things neat and things like that. And that helps me. So, but there's some out there that I've had that regardless of proof, I don't feel like they're as approachable. But to me, this
Mm.
one, so that's a word I use often. And I feel like this one is one that if somebody's just getting into rye whiskey, I mean, it is a rye, but it is very approachable in my opinion, to where somebody could try to drink it neat if they're not used to drinking neat and be okay. It's not going to, you know,
Yeah.
overpower or anything like that.
And that's really good to hear. I mean, that's what we really we're trying to get is approachable, because that's our understanding of kind of what Maryland style rye was, and you nailed it. I say this all the time, and you like put a huge smile on my face. Is like, I think how quickly we are to forget. I always say, I believe, I'm sure there's a few exceptions out there, but I believe we all started on Jim, Jack, and Johnny, like, right? Like the
Yep. Yep.
80, 86 proof range, right?
Right. Yep.
And like, this is kind of our nod to that as well, right? Like, nobody comes in via Booker's.
Hmm.
Like, very few people like, hey, I'm new to whiskey, and I fell in love with it drinking Booker's, kind of thing, like, or something. It's like
Right. Right.
it's like and people typically get to rye via bourbon, and then by then a lot of times they're used to a little bit higher ABV. But you
Hmm.
know, I also, like, there's plenty of times where I might want to have two or three tonight, like,
Hmm.
and it's just like,
Hmm.
and I can't do two or three cash drinks,
Right. Yep.
not at least on a school night.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I told you, man, I got a 1-year-old. So there's times where I think he's down for the night and I'm going to go, relax and pour something. And then if I have too many cast strengths, that'll be the night that he decides to wake up and start crying a little bit. So, so
Totally
yeah. So sometimes I want something that's, not going to kill me, every night drinking on it. But,
smart.
um, yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think, like I said, I just think there's so many times where I always say we kind of lose sight of that. People kind of, and not everybody. I'm kind of speaking in, just generally, but like you said, all the things that we kind of cut our teeth on, typically, the Jack and the Jims, and the Johnnies. That's a great way to put it. But we all kind of start somewhere, and then there was a reason why we started. There's a reason why we kept going with it. And so, I kind of, anytime somebody bad mouths something like that, I always try to go against it and say, let people, just kind of enjoy what they enjoy. And if they like, I know people that have, great collections and this and that, but they still prefer lower proof whiskeys, so
Yeah,
I think it's just all in the person. But yeah, and to
yeah,
me, it's also scenario. Like I said, if it's 100 degrees outside, I'm like, I'm not grabbing, or, and there's times where I'll make a cocktail, and people are like, oh, I thought you drink it neat, and it's like,
uh,
yeah, I don't want 130 something proof every, neat every single day, so, I definitely like the mix up there, but
I'm not afraid of a cocktail. I can tell you that. I tell some stories, people's heads would probably explode, but hey, it's my whiskey, it's my drink. I'm going to enjoy whatever it may be. And if it's a
yeah,
hot day,
absolutely.
like I was doing highballs this summer, we released a whiskey that was finished in extra añejo tequila barrels. A rye whiskey, took a 5-year-old rye, finished in extra añejo tequila barrels for 13 months. And, you put that in a highball and some soda water and the smallest little fresh lime squeeze in there. And it can be hot
Uh,
out, but I was like, I was still loving it,
right. Yeah. One of my favorite things to make, especially during summer, is like the Kentucky mules. Or putting bourbon in, instead of the vodka, and it, that's just one of, and with the, I always do extra lime and the ice in there, and it just, the ginger beer, it's just refreshing to me. So it's like I enjoy a good cocktail, but I'm pretty limited at home. So
Yeah,
like when I go out, I like for them to, because it is an art and a craft, and there, a lot of bartenders are amazing at it.
yeah.
But at home, I don't have that skill set. So yeah, so if I could take a ginger beer and some, a rye or a bourbon and make something good, then that's always good too. So
Next
um,
summer, drink some Maryland mules.
I will. It's funny too, because like I said, being from Virginia, it's like I hate calling it a Kentucky mule because it's like just that bitterness. But it's like, well, Kentucky was Virginia originally, but
That's right.
um, so I never hesitate to remind people of that part either. But
Ah, good for you, man.
yeah, yeah. So the next one we have is the double oak rye,
Hmm.
and I am, to be fair, I've already had this one before, and it is amazing.
Yeah, this
Um,
one is, this was supposed to be a one and done project for us on this one. We do a reserve series where we'll release, usually a limited offering, can range in a few hundred cases in the spring, and then we'll do another one in the fall. Like I said, we just had one that was finished in extra añejo tequila barrels, and then we just actually released one that's an 8-year old. But this was going to be a one and done, but we actually really liked it so much. We have to figure out how to make this a permanent offering in our core lineup. So it is now officially, as of a couple of years ago, a regular offering, always available, not allocated offering in our lineup. And basically, we'll age those two separate mash bills, like I said, for about 5 years. Then we'll go ahead and blend them together. This one we use a little bit more of the low rye compared to the
mhm.
signature rye, the 83. And then we'll put them back into another new American oak barrel. But what's interesting about this barrel is we cut grooves down the inside of the staves of the barrel. So,
Mm.
the big long staves of a barrel, we cut these lines down the inside, and it creates all these waves on the inside of the barrel. And so we call it a wave stave barrel. It increases the surface area that the whiskey can interact with wood by about 23-25%. And then instead of doing a heavy char and burning that off, we just toast it. And then we'll go
Mm.
ahead and do another 18 months inside that. So it's about a 6.5-year-old rye by the time it's said and done, 96.6 proof. To me, the color is just like out of this world. Um, it's just like this incredible, like almost syrup,
Yeah.
like maple syrup looking. It's
Yeah, and the
really
funny thing
dark.
you say that, I was just thinking I'm kind of getting maple syrup, and I always wonder, like, is it because it looks like that it's, my brain telling me. But I mean, with it being the double oaked, I mean, there's a lot of times where double oak products, I get that.
Yeah,
Um,
not uncommon. We got a lot of, the second layer of wood sugars from that second aging.
mhm.
You know, it's nice. You go up to almost 100 proof, so we get more spice out of this, more rye on the front, but some really interesting finishing notes on it that's really unique and different. The mouthfeel is sensational. I mean, the oils on the Glencairn are really unbelievable.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah,
you just don't see many double, like, yeah, very popular with bourbon, very popular with Scotch, but you just don't see many ryes, you know. So
hmm. This one, whereas the other, and I should have done them side by side, with the other one being a little brighter. I know we're going up a little bit in proof here too, but just that double oak, like you said, the syrup, it just the viscosity of it, the fact that it's more depth in here than the first. I had this, and I immediately, I was able to try it first. Immediately went out and bought a bottle, and then when I, at least around Indy, and I don't know, and that's where I thought I was going to actually ask you. I thought maybe at one point either maybe it was allocated or something, but you're saying it's not. I and just because in this area, I saw it and then I didn't see it, and then I was like, where? And I went. There's actually this store here locally that it's kind of like out by itself. There's not really much else around this liquor store, and there's a lady there that always helps me, and and she actually had a bottle of it. She said, "Yeah, this is my last one, but people are coming in asking about it," and I was like, "Yeah, I'll take it. That's your last one." Um, so since then, I've seen it, more often. But back then, I was like, man, and it's funny because you kind of think within whiskey, because there's so many allocated this and that, and hard to find. I always am a big fan of, and even my recommendations to my viewers of, hey, what can they walk in right now, and it's there, and and they'll enjoy. And so I kind of feel like sometimes I catch on to things beforehand, and I kind of pride myself in that. And I go in and I'm like, and they're like, no, we're sold out of the double oak Sagamore. So I'm like, man,
Well,
everybody else figured it out too. But
I don't know if that's true. We haven't gotten any news flashes here of that, so we'd like to
yeah,
think someday they'll figure that all out. I think what it is just, we don't have a full-time teammate in the Indiana market, and, we're a fairly young company.
mm-hmm.
And so sometimes the retailers just kind of forget to reorder us,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's on us to go in there and be like, hey, it's always funny when we go in there and be like, hey, we see you're out of Sagamore. Have you thought about reordering? He's like, huh? Well, I guess it's sold well. I'm like,
Right.
yeah. How about there? Like,
Yeah,
why don't
there's
you
no
give
more
us
on the
some more?
shelf. So
Like, it's just like it's so there's a lot of like that out there, which is just kind of makes you scratch your head a lot. But
right.
so, but as you become a little bit more of a known brand, then the stores are a little bit better about reordering you.
Mm-hmm.
We hear that where we don't have full-time people in the market, that you kind of like, you go in, they come into the market, they sell into all these stores, it sells out, and then we're not there reminding them they need to reorder
Mm-hmm.
again. And so
Yeah.
one day at
Yeah,
a
is
time,
it
right?
one of those? Because I'm just curious. Obviously, I'm from the consumer side of it, but is it one of those things like maybe they order your 4 different offerings, but then let's say the double oak sells out. Is it one of those things like they're not going to reorder until they sell the rest of Sagamore, or can they order the double oaked again without?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
you could order one bottle to 50 cases at a time, and
Mhm.
depending on what you want to do and have tied up in inventory. So they certainly don't do that. It's just, you think about it. I mean, these stores, they can't even keep up with what they have,
Mhm.
and the names they know. I mean,
Right.
they're constantly chasing these down. They're constantly inundated with new releases. Like, I question sometimes how often they even have quality time to walk the aisle and really analyze or run a sales report and see what's really happened. And they're like,
Mhm.
we don't know. It all seems to be selling. So it's kind of like one of these things. I mean, like I said, if we have 2,500, 2,400 distilleries in this country now, and if each one just made two whiskeys, and we know not everyone makes whiskey, but we also know a lot more
Sure.
make many whiskeys. I mean, we alone have 5 or 6.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, but if each just made two, you're talking almost five
Yeah.
thousand whiskeys could be out. You know,
Right.
it's so hard to keep up with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Excuse me. My wife, she kind of makes fun of me sometimes because one of my favorite things is especially if she's like, I got the baby, go check out some whiskey. And so I'll go, I bourbon hunt, but like in a different way. I'm not walking in, hey, do you got this, and walking out. I just love to go, and I stand in the aisle, and there's actually a liquor store here, about a few minutes up the street, and we have a pretty good relationship now. But when I first started going there, because they have like one of those whiskey walls, and I would go there and just stare at the bottle. I'm looking at the different brands, and I'm looking at and all these things, and they're like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and I'd be there forever, just you know. And like I said, there's so many different products out there, and it's like, hey, this is a brand I never heard of. I'm looking at that, and that was kind of like my thing. So as I did that at different stores, same thing. I'll go, probably probably pay more attention than they were. Where it's like, hey, you guys had Sagamore last week, and now you're sold out. You're getting more. And they're like, we had what, and so,
Yeah.
um, so luckily for me, the store that I kind of work with, they if I recommend something or talk with them, they're pretty good about it. But there's some places that are like, who's this guy? He doesn't know anything, but um, So I'm always interested on that side of things, how it works. But that's a good point. With as many distilleries as there is, I mean, that's a lot
Yeah.
to keep up with for sure.
And that's not even including Irish or Scotch or Japanese whiskeys, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep. For sure. So that that double oaked is one of my favorites.
yeah,
Um,
thank you. That one's been, our signature is very well received. It's our most awarded product we actually have. But the double oak is, it's got a lot of buzz behind it. That product is actually growing by triple digits right now nationally when it comes to sales. Um, so I always joke around and say, we always try to make sure these things never go on allocation, but every now and then you're like, if this really continued,
right.
but we think we've got it under control. That's our goal but that second aging is, you can't microwave that. You can't Amazon Prime that, so
Right. Right.
it's just one of those things. But I think we're looking pretty good on that, but it's a beautiful product. It's unique. It's one we're really proud of.
Well, that's like I said earlier, man. With my interest in barbecue too, it's like certain things take time if you really want that right product, and you kind of know where that is for you, and with that double oaked, if that takes time, like you said, you can't speed it up, so it still takes time. So, but to me, that always makes the end game even that much better.
Yeah. You ever done a brisket in 2 hours?
I have not. I've actually
No.
seen there's like YouTube videos
Yeah.
that tell you, and it's like, how good could this thing be, and
Yeah.
there's a guy, I watch him on YouTube sometimes, and I think was he trying to do it in 3 hours? There was something where he tried to speed it up, and at the end of the video, he's like, I didn't make it. It's like
Yeah.
he couldn't get it. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, just one of those things, and yeah, I think we can understand it in certain parts, but then other times people are like, why don't just bottle it, and it's like, whiskey doesn't really work that way.
Yeah,
Um,
unfortunately.
yeah. So next one we have is the cask strength, 112.2. So is this the 95.5 or is this the barely legal mash bill?
Uh, it's a blend of the two.
Okay.
So every product we
Oh,
have
every
has
one of them is
both
a
of them
blend of
in
the
there.
two. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So this cash strength is the cash strength version of the very first one you had of our Sagamore rye, our signature rye, the 83 proof. So
Okay.
the blend of the two mash bills is identical. The only difference really about this is the signature is 4 to 6 years old. This
Hmm.
one is a blend of 4 to 7. Um, and so we go up a little bit in age and obviously in proof. Whereas the double oak, like I said, we use more of the 52 than we do in this blend that you're about to
Okay.
see. So that's the fun thing about having these multiple straight rye mash bills is we can have a lot of fun with different releases here and there, occasionally some limited offering, playing around with those mash bills. And so it's like, a nice little spice rack. We've got a few different spices and how we want to use them and turn them up. And so it's nice. So this is, pretty self-explanatory,
Hmm.
but such a different experience, obviously, compared to an 83 proof whiskey.
Yeah, and this one, I kind of think of like back. So I grew up with primarily with my grandparents. My grandfather had all this audio equipment, which I'm sure by the time my son gets of age, it's going to be like, what is that? But um, where my grandfather had like a tape deck and an equalizer and all these different things, and I remember he had a CD changer, and I thought that was amazing. But with the equalizer, I kind of think about it whiskey in those terms too. Of sometimes you can tell where this is turned down or this is turned up or whatever it may be. For me, with the cask strength, I got some, like you said earlier, some of that clove, some of those baking spices on the nose on the 83 proof. But this one, it's as if that knob was just turned all the way up for spice. I get a lot more depth to that nose than, and I mean, proof alone that makes sense. But
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. Is just like once you go up to that higher ABV, it's just going to be a lot more, on the nosing for sure. For sure.
So we got a question that came in. Being in Baltimore, what's your favorite bourbon bar that sells Sagamore?
Oh man, like you are like that's a doozy because I can't name them all, and then somebody someday is gonna see this and be like that
Yeah.
guy. I swear to God. Um, but like here's just a couple of them. There are many good ones. So there's my CYA there.
Right.
Blue Pit Barbecue in Hamden. The Elk Room. Um, Barfly is a good one. Um, uh, there are just so many. Like yeah, but I mean Barfly, Blue Pit Barbecue, um, and the Elk Room are two really good spots. Very, very different experiences at all of them. You know, that's one of the things that I love about them is like, you know, depending on what you're looking for, there's just some great mixologist bars out there. There's the Rye in Fells Point is phenomenal. That's for sure. You know, so there's a lot of good ones. We're very lucky in our city. Like, you know, like I know every city is very lucky these days, but we're really lucky. We've got some really, I think Baltimore is an underestimated city when it comes to the experience of food and drink that we have here. You know, I was out Friday night with some folks from out of town that are in the industry. And I mean, they left, you know, going, holy cow, man, this place is amazing. You guys have so many cool whiskey bars and the food was phenomenal and you know and like it was a great vibe everywhere we went and it is, you know, it's cool. So you ever come to Baltimore, you know, you'll be I think you'll be pleased. I think you'll be
Yeah.
pleased.
Yeah. I think Indianapolis, it's like, man, I'm trying to get Indy on board. I think we're starting to get there. It's funny for me, man, because Virginia, I got, okay, we got crabs and crab cakes and all types of seafood. And then, certain parts of Virginia I go and barbecue and the North Carolina influence on that. And just a lot of great food. And then I come to Indianapolis and, I'm like, I lived in Kansas City at one point. Um, I used to go to Texas every year. Their barbecue, food is like a big thing for me. And then I come to Indianapolis and I'm like, what are you guys known for? And they're like, well, we have corn, and it's like, oh man, this is rough, So to be fair, they do have the fried pork tenderloin. That's kind of, I will say, they're kind of their thing. Um, and I had a buddy of mine visit from Virginia, and I was like, yeah, I guess Indy's kind of known for that, and he's like, well, we don't have that back home, and I'm like, yeah, everybody sells, and he's like, where have you gone that you've ordered a fried pork tenderloin in Virginia? And I'm like, I guess once I thought about it, I was like, maybe it is an Indy thing, but in terms of bourbon bars, though, I feel like there's a few here, but I think they're starting to kind of get, which I would imagine most cities are probably starting to figure out, like, hey, this is a good draw here, um, and there's more and more coming here. So I'm excited to see what else Indianapolis can do in terms of that. But I
Well,
do
I
get
think
jealous
that
hearing some of the options in other cities, though.
like I mean people love an easy getaway, and you know we're a really good location, whether it's New York to Charlottesville or whatever it may be, and you know just kind of an easy weekend away. People love, you know, you can go into a city, you can find great food, and of course, you know, we're gonna have a lot of crab and so forth, which you might not be able to get somewhere else, and a lot of good, you know, and then people find the local beers and the local spirits and things like that. Um, there's always live music in every good city, and I mean, live music is can't go wrong there, you know, and or you come into town and you pair it with an event or your favorite sports team just happens to be in town too. I just think it's so good for the local economies in every city, right? Like that's one of the things I think we've all missed a little bit is tourism. You know, people
Mhm.
coming in and discovering our city and discovering the local beers and discovering the local spirits and local restaurants and just kind of, you know, leaving and spreading the word about like, hey, you know, it was the weirdest thing. I went to Baltimore, you know, and you might laugh or something because you know what the media always wants to say and they got it wrong. Like that's a
Right.
great place, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. The funny, I'll share the story with you. And there's actually some people in the chat here, but the last time I was in Baltimore, I have there's somebody in the chat that actually used to work for the Texans, the football team. And the last time, and this is when I was living in Virginia, they were going to go play the Ravens. He's like, hey, you want to come see the game? And so I went and met with him and got a chance to meet some of the players. And, you know, and I go to the stadium, and I think it might have been Torrey Smith at the time. And I'm trying to find the locker room, and this guy, one of the security guys, he said, oh no, yeah, he knows the story coming. One of the guys was like, oh, follow, Torrey, he'll take you to the locker room and for the Texans. And I'm like, man, this is crazy to me, because it's like, even though he worked for the team, I'm still meeting players. It's amazing. And so I follow him. Flacco was there at the time. And, so now, and he had just, come off the Super Bowl MVP. And so anyway, so they kind of show me, and I'm just like starstruck, like, oh man, I'm just here. And then I think the Texans might have been 2-0 or 3-0, and I know that they were kind of favored into playoffs. I don't know if they were talking Super Bowl at that point. I can't remember. And anyway, long story short, they lost that game. The Ravens, and I think Ed Reed had just come to the Texans, so it was a big, big game. That might have been the Ray Lewis Ring of Honor game too.
Yeah.
I can't remember now. So it was like a big game. Big game. Ravens won. It wasn't even close. And then the Texans went from being a favorite that season, and they didn't win a game for the rest of that season. And then right after that, Kubiak was the coach at the time, no longer works there, So, okay. Yeah. 2-0. Yeah. 2-0 playoffs previous year.
Then you happened.
Signed Ed Reed. Yeah. Was going to go to the Super Bowl. Yeah. And then I happened. So I thought I had a great time in Baltimore last time I was there, but other people remember it a little. Oh yeah, 2-14, man, and and you started 2-0. So now we have realized that I'm the curse of of the Texans at the time. So that was the last time I was in Baltimore. But like I said, growing up in the area, though, I was pretty familiar with it, and I would love to go back again now that. I'm older, and even though I grew up there and just kind of experienced it a little bit more. So the last one we have, this is the Manhattan finish, the Distiller Select 103 proof. And while I'm pouring this one, so one of the questions I get sometimes when different distillers are on, there's a lot of times where people will ask how you prefer Sagamore. A lot of times, that's answered by however people enjoy it, but I think what I've realized with some of the viewers here is they kind of want to understand what your preference is when you're drinking Sagamore. So does it kind of matter which product you're drinking? Do you drink them all kind of similarly? Does it matter the scenario, or
what's
your preference?
That's always a tough one, because I tend to really be all over the map. I'm not going to lie to you. But I think when I'm drinking the higher, like when I'm drinking a Manhattan finish, like you have there in front of you,
mm-hmm.
There is something about that one to me as just a real true sipper. It's 103 proof. I tend to not want to add water or ice to it. Doesn't mean you can't. I'm not saying that would be wrong, but me, I also just love the color on it so much that as soon as you start to dilute it, I lose some of that color.
Right.
And so I tend to really enjoy just looking at that color. I really enjoy nosing it. And so I tend not to dilute it. But I drink a fair amount of Manhattans. So I enjoy that. I like that sometimes with our signature rye. And then there's times where I also like it, like if it's a Friday night, I'm not afraid to use a cask strength, or if I'm doing 2 ounces, I'll do 1 ounce of the 83 and 1 ounce of the cask strength, and I end up around 95 proof. And so that can be really fun and interesting too. So
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The best of both worlds. If I'm drinking a signature and going to drink 2 or 3 of them, I tend to love a big cube. Kind of just lengthens it out. I do like things cold sometimes, dilutes it a little bit, and that doesn't bother me at all. Double oak, I tend to drink more neat than anything, but occasionally I'll throw a big cube on it. I'll occasionally do it with a Manhattan with Amaro and really kind of do like what I call a midnight Manhattan, which I really love, like dark Manhattan, um, which is really interesting. The barrel selects, if I have a barrel select, I tend to eat that. I drink that more neat than not. But I am not afraid to add ice or water to any product. But that's typically what I'll do. It's kind of funny. A lot of people that hire ABV ice, and I understand why, or a big cube, lower
Mhm.
ABV like the signature, because I'm going to do, like, it's a Friday night, I'm going to do 3 of them. I just like a big cube in that. There's something really, or if I'm at a restaurant too, like I like a big cube in it. I like to dilute it. If I'm going to have one and then drive just one,
Right.
and then,
Right.
kind of thing. So, like, it's just something about prolonging it for me.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so that's just kind of where I am with it. I'm a little bit all over the map, if you will.
Yeah.
Like I said, but I'll drink them. I try cocktails all the time when other people are making them, but I'm only convinced I know how to make one, and that's a Manhattan. So I probably drink, for every 9 Manhattans, I drink one other type of cocktail. Otherwise I find myself rocks or neat.
Okay. And that one, I mean, doesn't surprise me with just the name alone, but when you talked about that being a sipper, I mean, that's like it's. I would say it's a cocktail in a glass, but there's more depth there for me than that. I think there's some that I've had where whether it's a finish similar and they call that cocktail in a glass and it really feels like a cocktail, doesn't feel like I'm still drinking whiskey neat, if that makes sense. This one to me, it's like the best of both worlds. I feel like we're on that cocktail road, but yet I'm still drinking a whiskey neat.
Yeah.
Um,
So thank you for that. That's exactly what we're striving for. I give the team so much credit on this one, and I would be joining you, Ty, except I haven't seen Manhattan finish in months, and I would love to have a Manhattan finish with you, but I don't even have an option, which I'm embarrassed to say is, like, it's all gone, man. Um, and
so was this just a one time deal
Yeah,
or
so that's a reserve release. So that was one of those
okay?
one and dones. But I got kind of good news there, if you will. But again, it was one that we were really proud of. So the team said, like, hey, what if we, like, finished our whiskey, and could somehow deconstruct the tasting notes of a Manhattan and then pay compliment to one of the greatest cocktails of all time, but it still be a whiskey, not an actual cocktail. And,
Mhm.
like, I thought, like, God, you guys are out there, but I love it. And so we sourced some cherry brandy barrels, bitter barrels, and some vermouth barrels, and we took 4-year-old 9-month whiskey, so almost 5-year-old whiskey, and put it in all those barrels, and then finished in there for another year and 9 months. And then, like I said, deconstructed that and kind of put a blend together that had the complements of a Manhattan. So you had the bright cherry, this herbaceousness kind of to it. You might get from bitters and a little bit of, like, the little bit of that sweetness from the vermouth. But, like, this rye spice, like, our finishes should still taste like a rye whiskey, but
Mhm.
pay compliments to whether it's a port finish or a sherry finish. And it was spectacular. Really clever, really innovative. I was super impressed. We don't have any left in Maryland or anything like that. And one that we ended up falling in love with so much, we're working on sourcing some more barrels, and we hope to have it again in potentially 2024.
Okay, I'll definitely look after it.
So
It's
cherish that in the meantime.
I know, yeah, yeah. It's man, that's good. And like, yeah, and there's not saying I see that too often, but just in general, I think sometimes with different finishes, there could be hints or influence on that finish or in that product. But then there's other ones that I have where it's just too overpowering for me, for my palate, and it feels like I'm going too far in this direction. And I want that Manhattan flavoring, those flavors there, but I still want to know that I'm sipping on a rye whiskey too. So
Yeah,
um,
we didn't want to do like, and there's nothing wrong with it, but we just didn't want to do like a low ABV. Like this is actually supposed to be a cocktail. It was supposed to pay homage to one of the greatest cocktails of all time that should only be made with rye and not bourbon. No offense.
mhm.
But like, like, and but like, no, it was fun, and I think they did a great job. Like I can still tell this is rye. It's got those baking spices in
Mhm.
there, but it's beautiful. The color is beautiful. It complements each other well. It was very well received in spirit competitions with a lot of golds and double golds. And it was just, I thought it was out of the box thinking versus saying, let's get a bottle, add some whiskey, add some vermouth, and add some, it's just like, no, this laid in barrels that had that product, but it was all whiskey that went into it. We didn't add. It's all a blend of straight rye whiskeys, and we did not add vermouth, we did not add bitters, we did not add anything like that. So
Yeah.
I just think it's really well done because it does give it this beautiful compliment.
Right, and without even knowing, excuse me, without even knowing that process, just being a consumer and drinking that, I can tell. I can tell that this isn't added. This is just an influence from the barrel that it was in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that's really good. I can see why we saved that one for last. Um, so as we kind of wrap up here, what's next? I guess that you can at least share for Sagamore Spirit, and is there anything? I know you said going into the last part of the year, starting to get a little crazy, but um, and I mentioned some of the other products in 2024, but um, are you just kind of going with you talked about the ages increasing over time, the 46 blends, but what's going on next for Sagamore?
I'd say the things that are the most exciting. So to be totally transparent, with all your viewers too, is, we started this project in 2013 and we launched in 2016, but we didn't finish building our distillery till 2016, 2017. So we started like many with contract distilling at MGP, which, again, we all know that we make great whiskey. It says it on the label. And uh, we knew it was a bad business plan to say, hey, let's spend 4 years building a distillery, 4 years aging, 8, 9 years later, collect $1. Or we have this great history of distilling in Maryland of rye whiskey. Here's my vodka. And that can be a good business model for a lot of people, but it just wasn't something we wanted to do. So we're really proud to announce that, we are now have 4.5-year-old whiskey. So when you hear about our blends being 4 to 6 and 4 to 7, we are now starting to put our aged whiskey in the bottle. And then we'll spend the next 2 years or so blending out before we come 100% Maryland distilled inside the bottle, Maryland aged in the bottle. But we don't want to go backwards in age, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So a product that might have 7 year in it might still be 2.5 years away before it's 100% us. So that's something that we've started to do this year that we're extremely, extremely excited about. And then we'll be releasing our first ever 100% Maryland aged, 100% Maryland distilled, Maryland aged, a very limited release in 3 weeks from now, our first ever bottled and bond. So it'll be a one-time release in second week in November. But we're very, very excited about this kind of historical moment for the brand to finally be putting, our aged product into it. And now we spend the next couple of years fading out MGP. And again, MGP was a great partner. They make great whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud to say we worked with them. And, but we're entering a historical moment for our brand, and we're thrilled about it. And we're really excited about the direction and the taste of our products. You're not going to see a huge difference, but if you notice some differences, I think you'll find them more pleasant. So this is just a very exciting time for us.
That's awesome. There's actually, and he's commented a few times that one of the viewers is in the Baltimore area, so I'll have to get him to get on that that bottled and bond and hold on to it the next time until I see him again. Um, yeah, that's awesome. It's to me,
There'll
it's
be a
always
few. There'll be about, I think, 7 other markets that also get it.
Okay.
But when I say other markets, some markets might literally get 3 6-packs.
Okay.
So, and the idea behind that, just too, so people know, is we're excited to do it, but we actually want to do it again in 2022. But we want it to be a 5-year-old, and
Mm.
so this year it's a 4-year-old, then it'd be a 5-year-old. So we have to hold back product
Mm-hmm.
to obviously continue to do that. So, but we're very excited to put our stake in the ground. There's no better way than to say, like, Bottled and Bond, be like, this is the ultimate, like, this is us. Like, there's no
Right.
questioning anything at all. So that's a good one. But just get it out there and finally kind of get that off of our back that we did it. Like, we released something that's 100% Maryland aged, Maryland distilled, Maryland aged, and then again, kind of just hold back a little bit, because we do really find the sweet spot between rye to be 4 and 7. So as we try and inch up to 4 and 5 and 6-year-old on some of these other products, we just have to hold back some inventory.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I'm really excited. Like I said, anytime when you're looking at different distilleries, I say younger, but especially in the whiskey world, that could be still older for other companies. But
Yeah.
um, excuse me, but just excited to see where Sagamore goes from here. And like I said, man, just trying the ones I had this evening. I didn't hide my cards at all. The double oaked, I think, is amazing. The Manhattan, kind of not surprised me as in I thought it was going to be bad, but it surprised me more of the fact that it is still me sipping on whiskey, not like you said, injected with Manhattan,
Yeah.
flavorings. Um, but it was all good. The cast strength is really good too. So I'm definitely excited, man, to see where you guys go from here. Um, some of my friends here in the chat, they're going to find that bottle and bond for me, and I'll be able to enjoy that too. But yeah, so anybody watching, make sure you check out Sagamore Spirit in your area. And yeah, where's the best place for people to learn more about Sagamore? Was it website, social media?
I'd say a couple options is definitely social media, at Instagram at Sagamore Spirit, Facebook, obviously. We do more of our event posting on Facebook, but following kind of everyday stories along is Instagram is great. And then go to our website and sign up to become a whiskey thief. And so whiskey thieves, we'll send out emails to them only when there's something relevant to share. We just don't randomly send you stuff. But we try to make sure they're kind of the first to know. So they're the first ones that found out, about our pennies proof and bottle and bond release. And they technically are the only ones that have access to it also. So you'll have to sign up to be a whiskey thief to even have a chance to get a bottle. So we always try to make them the priority. And so we keep, that's a good way for just kind of keep up with either new releases, new tours, different events and music that's happening down at the distillery, things along those lines.
Yeah, that's awesome. So everybody check out Sagamore Spirit. Like I said, everything I had this evening was magnificent. I appreciate you all taking the time to do this, and yeah, we'll have to have you back on the show down the road, and we'll see where you are at that point, and we'll go from there. But I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. Thank you so much for the opportunity and the chance to share the story with your viewers. It means a lot to us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody else watching, stay tuned for next week. It'll be Bourbon Talk again a new episode every Tuesday, 8 o'clock Eastern. So I'll see you next week. Thanks again, Brian.